You've probably been taught that the Bible is a single grand story encompassing creation, fall, and redemption, where God's mission is then to rescue and repair it all. But what if that's not the right way to think about Scripture or about missions? Our guest today offers a new model for the biblical theology of mission, recentering it on God's purpose to draw near to creatures out of love and delight. He argues that rather than being linear, the Bible is geometric. And if you want to know what that means, well, keep listening because we're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. We are, of course, an offshoot of Theology by the Pint, which is an organization in the Houston area where we invite people to come to our monthly events and talk about all kinds of juicy, interesting things around theology, philosophy, faith, and culture, all with a good craft beer in your hand. It's a ton of fun, and if you live here, you should totally come to our events. You can check them all out at theologybythepint.org. But as Evan likes to say, there's so much to talk about. We can never fully dive into these topics, and so we like to take the rest of the conversation to the podcast and fill in the blanks. And one of the fun things we get to do is interview people in Houston that are doing interesting things, writing interesting things. So our guest today is Collin Cornell, with a PhD from Emory University. He is assistant professor of Bible and mission at Fuller Theological Seminary in Houston, Texas. He's the author of 2 books on divine aggression, the editor of Divine Doppelgangers and The Incomparable God by Bent Strawn. And today he's here to talk about his new book, God Draws Near. And we're really excited to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for the invite. Really grateful to be here and excited to talk with you about these matters. Missiological.
I didn't know there could be controversy in missions, but because you think, well, missions, it's like we have the Great Commission in the Bible. And then, I went to a lot of Baptist churches in college, and that was the big focus, is like sending people out to the world to tell them about Jesus, and it seems pretty cut and dry. But you're going to maybe give us a new spin on it. So I'm excited. But before we get into all of that and a new hot take on missiology, first, just tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? How did you come to faith at all? What's kind of your story?
Yeah, thanks for that. I suppose most important is just that I grew up in the United Methodist Church, but It was a congregation that supported some folks overseas, some missionaries who were doing Bible translation work in Africa. And so they were always sort of coming through when they were on furlough in my parents' church. And that sort of was the beginning, the seed really of the vocation that I thought I was on, which was to be a Bible translator, a missionary Bible translator. So that's my first kind of vocational direction. And I pursued it really because I felt like I wanted to be entirely dedicated to service of God. And also I was already showing signs of being pretty academically oriented. And so
a little nerdy.
Yeah. So the only template I had that held those together was Bible translation, because they studied linguistics.
Yeah.
They get to study languages themselves, have to know the biblical text really well. So that set me on that direction. And actually, as part of my undergrad, I went to an undergrad that was Wycliffe approved, Wycliffe Bible Translators, one of their select schools that they recommended, which I don't know if they still do, but they did at the time. And as part of my undergraduate training, I actually did an internship in Nepal for the better part of a year, working as kind of a junior consultant for a translation project. So I was sort of, consulting on the biblical languages side for the work that a translation team was pursuing. And as part of that experience, I was befriended and mentored by 2 senior consultants, one from Brazil, one from the Philippines, who knew and loved the Old Testament in ways that I did not know were humanly possible. Really, their sort of anchoring was just remarkable. Their love was remarkable. And I wanted to be like them. And so I knew I wanted to study more Old Testament, and that is what I did when I returned back to the States and graduated from undergrad, and that really sort of followed me through. The reason, besides their example, that I wanted to study the Old Testament was really just a sense that it goes underappreciated in Christian circles, that there's a lot on tap there theologically that one doesn't find in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So that there's a lot of pathos, politics, sex, land.
Oh, the stories are great.
Stories are great. Also just how relationship with God works over generations. New Testament's kind of a snapshot. You see somebody who's sick or demon-possessed or whatever come to Jesus. The issue's resolved. They're sent on their way. versus sort of seeing what life with God, struggling over generations, looks like. The Old Testament gives us
Mm-hmm.
that. So for the work of forming people for discipleship, it feels like the Old Testament is very much needful,
Yeah.
is my sense. So that propelled me into Old Testament, and some other sort of important maybe factors along the way. My first job that I had after graduating from Emory was actually at a really small divinity school in the middle of nowhere, in fact, on a mountainside.
Hmm.
And that's actually important because the school itself and a lot of the work that happened there was really oriented towards all of God's creatures. So kind of an ecological interest people self-selected for, since that was the location where the school was. And I really leaned into that when I was there. And I can get into it more as we go if you like, but was really compelled to think more deeply about how God relates to the whole sort of non-human realm than certainly I had been taught to think about such
Sort of like
matters.
the Snow White of theology. I'm just imagining all the animals
Yeah.
coming, or maybe in Wicked, and all the animals are coming together at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was, where was that again? It was in the middle of nowhere, you said, on a mountain.
Yes. So basically between Chattanooga, Tennessee and Nashville, Tennessee, a place
pretty.
called Sewanee. Yeah.
Oh.
Way down above the Swanee River.
Is that a small school? I thought that was, I mean, it's an Episcopal school.
Yes.
Right, so.
Yes, it's I think one of the few, I should know this, but it's like the only Episcopal owned undergrad, but it also, less known fact, has a divinity school embedded in it. It used to have other
cool.
schools, like be a university, but
Yeah.
they have a divinity
So
school.
you went from thinking you were going to do Bible translation to teaching.
Yes.
Okay. And then what brought you from there? How did you arrive in Houston, and what do you do now?
That is a very long story. I've had a pretty circuitous professional path. It was by no means clear that this is the sort of job or role that I would end up in. So, I mean, I taught Old Testament there at Sewanee, and then ended up teaching New Testament and Greek because their New Testament prof went on sabbatical. And then taught languages there. Aramaic is one of my passions. Then that job fell through during COVID, but another unit in the same divinity school hired me. So I kind of had like 4 or 5 different jobs in the same institution. And that job was coordinating a Center for Religion and Environment. So basically like a think tank in the divinity school oriented towards helping churches to pursue creation care or ecological justice, but not by resourcing some newfangled academic theory, rather showing how basic Christian resources, the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, Scripture, are already full of implication for understanding other creatures besides the human. So kind of like you've already got it there. If you just sort of think about it for a little bit, that was our mission. And that is important actually ultimately for this book, even though pretty indirectly, just because, again, of how thinking only about God's purpose in the world in terms of healing or repair or reconciliation doesn't really take you very far when it comes to the trees, rivers, mountains, animals, and so on, because they're not doing much evangelism or social justice work. You might have noticed.
Yeah. Can I ask, you just mentioned Aramaic, so this is something I've never quite understood. Aramaic is the spoken form of Hebrew, is that correct?
That is not correct.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah. So they're actually kind of in different branches of the Semitic family.
Okay.
So Aramaic is a different language, the imperial language of the Persian Empire. Kind of doesn't make sense. You sort of think about the New Testament, you'd think the Roman Empire, they're speaking Latin. That was sort of true, but mostly not true. Greek, hence the New Testament, hence Paul writing to the capital city in Greek. Similar phenomenon with the Persian Empire, where you get, it's Persian. You think Persian's the imperial language, but Aramaic was the language used for bureaucracy and trade and so on.
What language did Jesus speak?
I was just about to ask.
Okay.
Because I've heard that he spoke a lot of in Aramaic.
Yeah, that's the sort of going theory, but a little bit beyond my bailiwick, but mostly I think the newer understanding is that Greek was probably saturating a little bit deeper beyond just the sort of bureaucratic administrative level. So potentially, spoke some Greek.
Oh. Like, I've never heard that before. That's interesting. Like the Passion of the Christ. It's in Aramaic, right?
I believe that's right, yeah.
I think Mel Gibson, like everyone had to learn Aramaic to...
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, probably
there
not.
are some lines in Hebrew, like when the Old Testament is quoted, but I think, yeah. Anyway, and my understanding is like with the modern conflict, like in Gaza and all that, like there are a handful of tribes that still speak biblical Aramaic, but they're like reducing in number. They're like getting moved out and stuff. It's one of the,
Yeah, probably not. Maybe tribes, but certainly, definitely still some Aramaic speaking peoples. It would not be biblical Aramaic though, because
okay.
Aramaic has developed a lot over the years.
Okay.
There's sort of there's Old Aramaic, the kind of Iron Age Aramaic. There's Imperial Aramaic, the sort of Aramaic that of the Persian period into the Hellenistic period. And there's all kinds of Aramaic dialects, Syriac and so on, that kind of come along afterwards. So modern Aramaic would be kind of even downstream from them.
Well, same as English. If you read Old English, you can't read it. I mean, but it's our quote language, you know.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. Aramaic.
Okay. Well, you said that, and I figured maybe our audience didn't know what that was, and
Yeah.
I didn't know
helpful.
what that was.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's right. Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. No Aramaic in the book though. Sorry.
Okay, but back to the trees.
Back to the trees
Yeah.
that aren't evangelizing to anyone. Rude.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were doing this religion and what was it called? Religion and nature, the world.
Religion and environment, but it's kind of, our work was more specific than that. It sounds kind of generic or sort of non-sectarian. It was very much Christian work, helping churches, but trying to sort of show them that creation care is already something, or just kind of a sense of responsibility, reciprocity with other creatures is already built into just sort of being a basic Christian.
Yeah.
Like stewardship as a concept, right?
Yeah, although maybe not stewardship, because stewardship sort of, a steward is a manager role versus thinking about, the Psalms or biblical texts where creatures are worshiping God. The
trees of the field will clap their hands.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so even if you say like, oh, it's just poetic language, trees don't clap their hands, well, it's probably something a little bit more substantial than just sort of a figure of speech or whatever. But recognizing, other creatures worship God, have a relationship with God, is pretty much deeply in the Bible.
Okay, this is not one of the questions that we said I was going to ask you, but I have to ask because it's been asked at our events before and people have said different things. Do you believe that animals and or things like trees have souls?
I don't know about the soul question, but I think it is, one can productively raise the question about whether other creatures besides the human have moral accountability. So different question maybe than the soul thing. I don't know how to answer that. But yeah, Genesis 9, after the flood story, when God makes a covenant, it seems to be that other creatures are held responsible for killing humans, which is not something you do if there's no moral reasoning. Or in the book of Jonah at the end, the lesser known chapters, when Nineveh repents, the cattle also wear sackcloth and fast. So it's a silly story. It's meant to be parodic. We got into this in the earlier panel, but it still shows sort of a possibility for thinking about other creatures as having, sort of accountability or moral reasoning.
Interesting.
So is it 2 against 1 that Jonah is parabolic?
Get out of here. Oh my gosh.
For once, I'm not outnumbered on that. Okay, but we take Jonah very seriously. The pit bulls then are probably not going to heaven.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know about the pit bulls, or even if you think about in Mark's gospel, Jesus, when he's tempted, is with the animals. The angels minister to him, Satan tempts him, and he's with the animals.
Huh. All right, well, C.S. Lewis was kind of onto this idea, so...
Well, while I'm thinking of it, this might be a question later, sorry, but can we eat meat then? I mean, is that...
Yeah, so I mean...
We've really gone off the rails, but I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this
it's
is
actually, that could be surprisingly relevant to the book. Not the question about meat or not, but the way that tragedy is sort of folded into the entire biblical story. Because in the beginning, nobody eats meat. Genesis 1, humans, animals, everybody eats just the plants. But then explicitly after the flood, it seems like humans don't really change. Their thoughts are evil from, all the whole day long. That's what God says before the flood, after the flood. God's the one who adjusts in that account, putting away the bow.
Yes.
But also God authorizes humans and other animals to eat animals at that point. So it's kind of like God accepts that some degree of violence is going to be baked in from here on, so kind of harm reduction style. God says, if you're going to do it, this is the way to do it. And so, in our post-lapsarian world, eating meat is legitimated, authorized. And in fact, the offerings made to God in the tabernacle are described as food sometimes by the priestly texts. And the aromas pleasing to God and so on. And so anyways, it's a post-fall world, post-lapsarian, and tragedy, downfall, sinfulness, violence is sort of wound into the whole thing. But that doesn't mean that God's good purposes for creation are somehow kind of completely derailed.
Yeah.
We'll get into that because that is actually important for the book.
So wherever we're going with this, it's not towards like PETA.
It's not toward being a vegetarian. It should be your bigger concern.
Yeah. Okay.
Except
but
maybe in the new heavens and the new earth. Ugh.
Yeah.
But maybe then fruit will taste like meat. But we get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
You can make a prudential argument, though, just like with just war. It doesn't say just because there's a theory that some of it's justified doesn't mean that any of it is justified. And so with PETA, just the fact that animal consumption is legit doesn't mean that any form of it is legit.
Yes.
So we can eat cow, but we probably ought not to kill foxes
Horses.
to make a jacket, a coat, a fur coat.
Oh,
Yeah.
like a mink coat. Yeah.
Yeah, like we could live without the fox coat. But if we kill a cow, we might as well use it for a rug.
Might
Or
as well.
baseball gloves.
Might as well. There you are. You're already
Right.
there.
Okay.
So
We don't even need Collin.
Use all
Tell
parts
us
of-
about your book. God Draws Near, Evan. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so as we get into the book, what brought you from that kind of world to, like, what made you want to write this book?
a sense. So while working for the Center for Religion and Environment, like I said, sort of running up against the limits of the model that I had received for understanding God's mission in the world. So if you just think about, like you said, Great Commission, go out and save sinners, save souls, because Jesus is coming. Now is the time to turn to the Lord. Doesn't really leave a whole lot for anyone else, any creatures to sort of do or contribute. And in fact, doesn't really leave plenty of humans with much to do or contribute, since disability will come along for most of us in our later lives, and many of us live with disability anyways. And so for folks who can't sort of contribute to God's mission by joining God's Spirit in evangelism or witness or social justice or whatever, we can get into the definitions of mission if you like, but whatever it is, certain people can't really join in just because of natural limitations, and other creatures can't really join in. So we don't have much to say. If that's the sort of going model, didn't have much to offer for churches thinking about how is the tree, how are other creatures, how are people that live with disabilities so significant for God's calling in the world. So I had to come up with a different kind of understanding of how those folks and other creatures might be important for God's purpose in the world. And did that by homing in on some texts that aren't necessarily the go-to mission texts, like the Great Commission or the Great Commissions, John 20, Mark 16, etc., but are still, I think, especially historically, really important texts for understanding God's relationship with us.
We're going to get into, you went to the spiciest part of the Bible for this, but before we go there, when you say that not everybody can contribute to this the way that you had been thinking about missions, do you mean, I'm trying to really put the cookies on the bottom shelf here. Do you mean that because some people might be old or not able to kind of like go out and tell people about Christ, that they're not sort of contributing to being salt and light and ambassadors in that way? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Because I feel like I grew up learning that not everyone was going to be a missionary, but that you could, do your job as unto the Lord. That would, show the world how God's kingdom works and ought to work. And that by doing things like, learning the Bible and being in community in a healthy way and having a good marriage and being a good parent, all that kind of stuff, like you're sort of preaching to the world in those things as well.
Well, what happens when you're, unemployed, or you become paralyzed, or have a child who's
maybe you
not
suffer
going to speak?
Yeah.
But they're not contributing on that model. So I'm saying we need some other way of understanding how relationship with God works, or what its basis is, because it can't just be that. I'm not denying that the importance of the commissions and so on, but we have to say something else, something more. And my problem really with a lot of biblical theology of mission, we get into what that is, but a lot of mission discourse is...
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
No one really gets around to saying what that something else is. That's the basis of people's relationship with God. That doesn't go away. That's not jeopardized. It's not conditional on your ability to contribute. In life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So give us the sort of reigning. You spend the first part of the book talking about kind of the reigning theory. Give us like that in a nutshell, and then tell us why there's more to it.
Yeah, so I appreciated your introduction because perhaps, I don't know who the sort of viewership is entirely, but will be familiar with a version of the Bible as one big story or one big drama that goes something like this. God made the world good, even perfect. But things quickly went awry. Genesis 3, humans disobeyed, and humans and the non-human world suffers the consequences of that disobedience. God's work on the far side of that event is in effect seeking to remedy the consequences. So to bring humans back into relationship, to we can use any number of different biblical concepts. God is healing a broken creation. God is restoring people who are somehow messed up. God is reconciling. God is redeeming. God is forgiving. Whatever the actions are, and those are all right in biblical terms and concepts. But they all do more or less fall under sort of a grand heading of repair. God's action is reparative.
Okay.
A world that's broken, God's at work to repair it.
Yeah.
And effectively reading all kinds of other subsequent parts of the Bible under that heading, with that lens. So thinking about, why did God call Abraham? Why did God, covenant with Israel? Well, ultimately because of a world that's broken, God's sort of plan to repair it. And so too with the sending of the Son, the coming of Christ in flesh. Why did he come? To seek and save the lost, for us and for our salvation, if creedal folks. Yeah, and so all of that too is really answering to that same kind of big catalyzing problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the dominant understanding.
Yeah.
And so part of the burden of the book is to trace out, how did we get here where that seems so natural to most Christians? Because it wasn't always so, in fact. There are parts of that story that have an ancient pedigree, but not quite in the way that many of us have heard it. In fact, the way that many of us have heard it, a little bit more specific here, with the first 2 chapters of Genesis being kind of the high watermark of God's relationship with creation, the benchmark, the golden era, and then things kind of going south after that, and really sort of circling the drain throughout Genesis 4 through 11. So each episode kind of worsening the condition of humans, and then the calling of Abraham being sort of the beginning of God's counter initiative to create a contrast people, or whatever the exact parsing of Israel's role is. It's God's sort of counter action to that bottoming out that we find in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel story. So all of those particular moves basically do not exist prior to the 1940s.
What do you mean they don't exist?
Genesis 12 was simply not a significant text for understanding God's mission in the world prior to Gerhard von Rad, one German scholar who published a commentary on Genesis around the year 1950. Several editions ran, but around the year 1950, and it proliferated extraordinarily. So
you're not saying that people didn't believe that story was true, but that it was sort of this quintessential turning point for God's mission in the world.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. so that basically we most of us live in the sort of world interpretively that he made. This one German guy made. And his work is cited up and down all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, including, and I would say even especially, in evangelical scholarship.
Yeah.
And initially, in those first decades, people remembered where it came from and cited him, and now they don't remember
it's
where.
It's just part of the zeitgeist.
It's just part of the kind of ether. But it comes from a certain guy. And if you look, part of the work in preparation for the book was to read works about mission and the Bible from the 1910s, 20s, 30s that do not put those pieces together in the way that we now understand is very familiar to us. Yeah, they don't. In fact, most of them are based on Jonah, based on 2nd Isaiah, the latter part of Isaiah. Those are the mission texts in the Old Testament, not Genesis 12, and not sort of stringing Genesis together into this story of kind of a downfall and deterioration, and then God's counter work to remedy it.
Okay.
Yeah, Genesis rarely occurs in works on mission in the Bible prior to the 1940s, 50s, and onwards.
So,
well, that's interesting.
When we say mission, you mean telling people about Jesus?
I bet he means more than that.
Okay.
Mostly, yes. So most of the works in biblical theology of mission, or what used to be called biblical foundations of mission, so any books that sort of meet that description, mostly have been written by people who were or are missionaries. That is, whose main work is seeking to call people to follow Jesus, especially across cultural lines.
Okay. So I mean, even your average reader, if they just pick up a Bible and they read Genesis, okay, I mean, they will, I think, perceive a pretty big difference between Genesis 11 and 12, right? I mean, like, because you have stories of catastrophe, basically fall, flood, Babel, and then you have this, and it's like so global, right? In orientation, it's so big. And then Genesis 12, you kind of, it's like almost like a redo. Okay, let's just talk about Abram now, and it kind of focuses on Abram and then his lineage and
One
so
person,
on.
one nation.
So
yeah.
it doesn't seem that weird that somebody would key in on, is his thesis what? That in Genesis 12, like Abram gives us a model for mission or what?
So Gerhard von Rad, this one German scholar, would not have said that, but that is definitely a claim that many have developed since then, that
Okay.
Abraham is sort of a model or a paragon of mission, especially, like you say, because of the seeming symmetry, the kind of matching between the global scope of the problems in Genesis 1 through 11, and then the kind of scope of the promise made to Abraham, namely that all the families of the earth will be blessed through him. But a piece of what you said there maybe is right, that many readers, especially probably in kind of Western or Protestant context, would understand the series of episodes between Genesis 4 and Genesis 12 as catastrophic. But that is by no means obvious to many prior generations of Christian interpretation. So that, for example, heading towards the book's thesis, that one big story, one big drama, all that is distinctively like post-1950s.
Okay.
Those were categories that really got up and running at that time because of certain currents that were, in theology at that moment. We don't have to get into the specific names, but it was a very popular approach in general, sort of Protestant, especially ecumenical circles at that time, to think about the Bible as one big story.
Can we just blame Karl Barth? I mean, get it over with. I'm kidding. I don't know anything about Karl Barth.
Yeah, so Karl Barth is important actually for mission discourse in the 20th century. The whole kind of missio Dei approach, the mission of God, thinking about the Bible, especially in terms of sending, God's sending. So mission not just as something the church does, like one of its tasks, but as the thing that the church exists to participate in. That's all Karl Barth. So he is really important, but he's not a sort of one big story guy, actually. Karl Barth is not. But other more popular dudes at that time were, such as Oscar Kuhlmann, especially, who gets laundered into evangelicalism via George Ladd.
Okay, let me ask a question. I hope this is helpful. My experience, or knowledge of, say, the East, okay, like Eastern Orthodox Christians, they don't seem very focused on mission. I mean, they just don't seem all that interested in it. It's like, well, we're here and we have our liturgy and it serves this purpose. And it's kind of a national, sort of like everybody's Orthodox, and it's a familial thing and da-da-da-da. Middle Eastern Christians, those that are still living, largely, I think, kind of the same kind of culture. The West, is, we're kind of uptight. We're kind of legalistic. A lot of that deals with, I think, the history of the Reformation, both the problems that Luther encountered and perhaps even the solutions, like hyper-focus on justification, sin. So put it this way. You walk into your average Roman Catholic church, there's a gigantic crucifix in the front. You go into an Eastern Orthodox church, it's a wall of icons, because in the West, we're concerned about sin and being right with God and our guilt and our shame and all that. And in the East, it's about being in communion with God. And I think the East would generally be like, yeah, like you guys focus way too much on all that stuff. Yeah, cross is nice and all, but it's just not that central. It just isn't. Okay, so that said, did this German guy you keep talking about that I've never heard of, is it possible that, the mission is, so important to the West? It just seems like we're, really invested in this mission more than the East. Is that fair, or am I overthinking things?
I mean, as a very general description, yes. I mean, Protestants have been Roman Catholics too have been responsible. The Catholics first, actually. The idea of missions as a sort of recognizable topic for Christians to be riled up about. That's a Jesuit invention. Jesuits were the ones who sort of went on missions. And
I've seen the movie.
Yeah, right. And the terminology comes from. I mean, it's sort of inextricable from Jesuits being appointed to sort of go overseas, and so it's very much tied together with European diaspora, early European sort of colonization work. It's all sort of tangled together. Protestants pick it up and sort of run with the language as well. But anyways, regardless, your general impression is right that the sort of expansive dynamic in Christianity has been more of a sort of Western production than Eastern Orthodox, but they also have missionaries and have communities that are founded, whether a long time ago, medieval period, or modern period, by missionaries. The part of that, though, about kind of that Protestants are sort of especially concerned with mission or angsty or guilt-ridden or whatever, I don't think that's quite right, because actually the magisterial reformers, you mentioned Luther, Calvin, their buddies, Bucer, whatever, all those guys, didn't really care much about overseas mission. They weren't seeking to sort of send people to, rescue souls.
They're too busy reforming the problems in their own backyard.
And they also just didn't think of the world in those terms. They thought about sort of there's Christendom and then there's the heathens, but they didn't have a sense of responsibility vis-a-vis the heathen world. That doesn't sort of arise until later. Some famous figures that are typically associated with that are like William Carey, Adoniram Judson, these early folks who started to read the Great Commission, actually really for the first time, as something that's incumbent on all Christians, rather than just sort of something that was true of the initial apostolic period. So again, up until that period, the early Protestant, post-Protestant moment, people didn't think of the Great Commission as something that all of us are sort of responsible for.
Huh.
Yeah.
A modern version would be like the Benedict option, like Rod Dreher's kind of book that, where he's kind of advocating a withdrawal to a degree from society in a way. I mean, he's kind of like, well, I haven't read the book, but I get the impression it's basically like we need to retool, kind of focus on ourselves. And as it happens, he isn't a convert to Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I don't know, maybe.
Well, so if that's kind of the reigning, at least in our lifetimes, what we were taught, this grand narrative that God is repairing, restoring, redeeming, forgiving, healing, and you say it's not wrong, but it's not the whole story, then what is?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I think it would be helpful for me to say something about why that is incomplete.
Okay.
What happens if we just run with that sort of mission as repair?
Yeah.
God's work of repair, and then our sort of joining in with that work is the problem of obsolescence. The book spends a lot of time with that particular word, obsolescence.
What does that mean?
The idea being that repair is a project with an end point. Mm-hmm. If you're healed, I mentioned earlier, the Gospels, if you've got a problem, you're sick, Jesus heals you, sends you on your way. You are no longer a person in need of healing. Mm-hmm. You're no longer sick. You're no longer demon-possessed. So that process or project comes to an end, mm-hmm. which means that it kind of the terminus, the end point is built into it, as it were. Mm-hmm. So that if one's relationship to God is basically defined by that dynamic, then it is a relationship that, at least on those terms, will come to an end. So this plays out in a lot of ways.
So again, cookies on the bottom shelf. I'm trying to make this accessible for everybody. You're saying that if Sarah, my job is to tell everybody I know about Jesus and having a saving faith in him, then there's an end, because either I will die or everybody I know will be saved. I mean, like, what do you mean? What would the end be?
No, I mean more that if your basic relationship to God is, I am a sinner in need of forgiveness. Yes. The forgiveness is accomplished or will be accomplished.
My actual healing myself, not my mission to the world. Okay.
But either way, you look, and so then you have to have something else, some other basis of relationship, because if you are just a sinner in relationship to God, God will, we trust, already has in Christ overcome that problem. Yes. And so you need more to say, because that's going to come to an end.
Sure.
And so
but I think most Christians would say that's when discipleship comes into play and growing closer to the Lord and that kind of thing. But continue. Yes.
I agree. But that growing closer to the Lord is rarely kind of realized in any very rich biblical way. It's sort of left to the edges of our theological vision, or at least that's my fear. And especially if you have the Bible as one big story, which is basically a salvation story, then you don't really you don't really get to that sort of something else basis of relationship with God, unless you just kind of park it in Genesis 1 and 2, or park it right at the end of Revelation.
Okay, that's fair. That's very fair. Okay, so continue. Yeah.
So, but the kind of endpoint problem, the obsolescence problem, I think it plays out in our own lives individually, but also it has definitely played out with respect to the vocation of Israel, the Jewish people. So that, for example, a lot of Christian reflection down through the ages has said that the Jewish people were meant to be a light to the nations.
Mm-hmm. Blessed to be a blessing.
Yes, but either they failed in that purpose and so kind of forfeited their standing with God, which is to say their relationship with God kind of, obsolesced in some, so they're still around, but the sort of the basis of it is sort of evacuated. Or they were meant to be sort of a incubator for the coming of the Messiah, and so they did that. Either way, that's sort of a task that stands in a close relationship with the problem of the world, the fallenness crisis of creation. And hence is liable to completion.
Yes.
And so that sort of closure possibility exists when repair is your governing concept. Same thing, the book says, actually, with the incarnation itself.
Okay.
So that stuff about sort of the status of the Jewish people, I don't know, your readership might or might not find interesting or pressing. I think it is. Not just as a matter of neighborliness vis-a-vis, religious elders, siblings, but also internal to Christian theology. I think it matters. But for sure, how we think about the incarnation does matter to us as Christians. And if we define Christ's coming only in terms of repair and salvation, then the rationale, just like in the case of the Jewish people, the sort of possibility of completion, of closure, pertains.
Okay.
So that once the world is healed, once redemption is decisively come, Christ has accomplished his purpose. If becoming incarnate only serves that purpose, there is no longer any reason for Jesus to be incarnate post-redemption. You all tracking with that?
I am, yeah.
And so that is a problem for Christian theology. Why is it that we trust our Lord is still embodied if the purpose for his coming in the flesh is completed? And this is in fact a glitch in Christian theology that some Protestant theologians noticed and addressed, specifically, as the book points out, by saying, okay, we're going to bite the bullet on this one and just say, yeah, at the end of time, Jesus disincarnates.
Oh, wow.
Not to say that he is subordinate or any of that stuff. The Son is eternal, all that, perfectly orthodox, but no longer incarnate.
In a human body.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's not necessary. Again, if the Bible is just one big salvation story, Christ accomplishes salvation.
The saving happens, right.
There's no more reason for him to be incarnate, which I find genuinely horrific, bizarre and horrific. But that points out the gap theologically. Again, we need something else, some other sort of theological rationale to understand why did he become incarnate? Because it evidently is more than just to save.
Right. Okay, I'm tracking. Yeah. I'm here. What is it?
Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm guessing the question I was going to ask
is coming.
Yeah, but let me ask it anyway. Okay. Like, is the answer that being in a body can be just an intrinsic good, that Jesus became flesh to save our fallen flesh, but he remains flesh because there's nothing wrong with flesh?
Sort of anti-Gnosticism or something?
Yeah, I mean, Genesis 1 and 2. You mentioned Genesis 1 and 2 in Revelation, that's kind of how I view things. Basically, that the new heavens and new earth is Genesis 1 and 2. Essentially, Genesis 1 and 2 is kind of a proto-vision of that.
Right.
But then why is the Father and the Spirit why are they not also embodied?
Well, I don't know why one has to be good and, like it can be good to not be in flesh and good to be in flesh. You know what I mean? Like,
I personally am a big fan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that we don't need to pack everything into Genesis 1 and 2 or the end of Revelation.
Sure.
That's sort of one of my basic sort of spiels. Though one is obligated to do that if you're operating with the Bible as one big story, because it's sort of like
the bookends.
Right, the bookends, and also just the kind of whole thing proceeds along a single track. And just like in a English class 101, there's the narrative problem, and then everything kind of answers to that. It's driven by that narrative problem. So the fallenness, corruption, sin, devil, flesh, etc. All of that is the problem driving the whole thing. And that means
climax at the cross, denouement in Revelation.
but that also means that you can only sort of take the beginning prior to the fall, Genesis 1 and 2, as your benchmark, your standard. But I don't think that we need to do that at all.
Okay.
Because, like I said, you asked about PETA and vegetarianism earlier. I think that events after the fall can represent a fuller vision of God's purpose towards creation than in Genesis 1 and 2. So you mentioned sort of the obviousness of the catastrophic episodes in the beginning of Genesis. Not so obvious to early Christian readers. In fact, one finds, and I'm certainly filling in even more in the book, that think about the expulsion of the first humans. Yeah, first human parents expelled from the garden, tragic. They disobeyed. Now they experience shame. Now they need clothing. Now they have kids. They suffer, pain,
Death
childbirth, and all that.
In the
But
mix.
coming to the knowledge of good and evil is elsewhere in the Bible. That means growing up. It's just sort of a shorthand for moral
Maturation.
maturation, moral accountability. I don't think God's opposed to wearing clothes myself, or having kids. That's apparently what God meant in Genesis 1. The initial blessing given to humans is that. So yes, to the tragedy of the fall, but also somehow there's a maturation, there's a growing up that happens with the humans there. And that same dynamic plays out across all those early stories in Genesis. So that Cain and Abel, sad, terrible, tragic, fratricide. But Cain names his son, names a city after his son. First city, Cain is the builder of. God's not opposed to cities. Cities represent sort of creation reaching a deeper, fuller flourishing. Same thing. Cain's descendants invent music, metalworking. Again, in either case, that is creation sort of assuming a richer form, which is what God wanted all along.
Yeah.
Same thing I'd say with the Tower of Babel story, that yes, to human hubris, sin, judgment, all that, but that the dispersal of humans, the kind of sundering of languages, the multiplication of humans in different communities, that's what God wanted to happen all along. So the route is crooked or wrong or is messed up somehow, but the result still conforms to God's purpose for creation, which is to say, becoming more complicated, more beautiful, more interesting along the way.
Okay.
So you can see there, that's not just a tragic deterioration reading.
Right. It's not all downward spiral.
Not all downward spiral. It is downward spiral, but also somehow the downward spiral is kind of double helically wound together with the progression of creation towards God's purpose. And the book really pulls that logic through all the way to the tabernacle, which is which is to say, the book, the Bible, but also this book in particular, which is to say that instead of taking Genesis 1 and 2 as kind of the ideal, the archetype, and really trying to pack all of our theology into there so that all of our ideals for governance and human relationship and gender and everything has to get sort of thrown into those chapters. In fact, the high watermark, the centerpiece of the Pentateuch, is the tabernacle. That's where the more chapters are spent. Just think about the literary real estate. You get a couple chapters, they're kind of short really, but as far as biblical chapters go, versus tons of chapters dedicated to how to build this thing, what goes on inside of it, how it works, how to do the sacrifices in it.
Measurements.
Measurements, the whole nine. So the sort of obsession of the Pentateuch is with the tabernacle.
Okay.
The tabernacle is, if you will, kind of the apex, the center, the kind of high watermark for creation. That God always wanted for it to go there. And if you think about it, the tabernacle, all that detail, the beauty, the metals, the spices, the fabrics, the hides that go into it, all that is kind of creation at its full flourishing and enabled in that moment to become the place where God's presence descends.
This makes me think of John Walton's stuff about the, Eden being a tabernacle imagery kind of, and then the tabernacle being the fuller version. Yeah, I haven't read his stuff, but my fear is with him that he sort of sees, as many do, the tabernacle as kind of a callback to Genesis 1 and 2. So and you think it's the pinnacle? I think it's the reverse. Yeah. So that whatever we see in the garden is sort of the prelude, the entree to the tabernacle, which is the full expression. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and in Revelation, doesn't it talk about the temple is built? And I've read Revelation several times. I'm still confused, but there's talk about a temple or a central place or something. So
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say too, I mean, just again, that we, especially Protestants, but tend to read Genesis 1 and 2 as sort of that's the, that's the deepest, closest intimacy of humans with God is there in the garden, unafraid, unashamed, close to God, hearing his voice, all that, versus thinking that, no, the presence of God, the glory, the fiery personal presence of God that descends into the tabernacle, that is the sort of peak moment for God and humans and all creation in the tabernacle.
Well,
Okay, wait. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I would argue that liturgical churches agree with that, in that in many respects, serious liturgical churches embody a lot of the aesthetics and practices of a worship space where God is truly present. I mean, if you look at the construction of, altars, the wearing of vestments, the burning of incense,
The view of the sacraments.
yes, the view of the sacrament, how
Over,
Christ is
under,
present.
in, around, through, behind.
Yes, all
Yeah.
the prepositions. I mean, I think you can make a strong case for the use of vestments, for example, based on, what Levitical priests would have worn, and the use of incense and so on. But there's always someone that has an alert allergy to incense, so
They'd probably just have a demon.
maybe.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. So, sorry.
Well, but you said something about we see Genesis 1 and 2 as the pinnacle of intimacy with God, which of course is a great segue to how in the world is it that you're like, okay, I'm going to write a book about how we've kind of gotten part of the story, but not the whole story of mission. And the tabernacle is the center of it all. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
What in the world does Song of Solomon have to do with any of this?
Yeah.
Or you were just feeling salacious, or?
No, not at all. I mean, I actually start with the Song of Songs before transitioning to the tabernacle, and that's partly inspired by a saying that I received from a Jewish colleague and friend. She passed away, but drawn, I think, from the Mishnah. But at any rate, a saying that if Torah is the cup, the Song of Songs is the handle to the cup.
Okay.
So in other words, the content of Torah is
Torah being the first 5 books of the Bible.
right. The Pentateuch, thanks. Yeah, is digestible or potable or whatever via the Song of Songs. That the Song of Songs, reading it, really gives us a way into the most essential dynamics of the Pentateuch, which sounds very strange, but what I found by researching both of them is it's true, at least in this sense, that the Song of Songs is a book in the Bible, and mostly what it is it's a poetry. It's a voice, a female voice, a male voice, and they are super excited about each other. They are deeply in love with each other, and they are celebrating one another sensually. When they're apart from each other, they're yearning and pining, want to be together. And then when they are together, they're like, wow, look at you, and doing all this sort of description of each other, their bodies. So it's very sensual. It's ancient erotic poetry at a minimum. But what it isn't is problem solving.
Okay.
It's not really about overcoming any big problem. There is no crisis. There's occasional couple little moments where the woman's voice, she's searching for her lover, can't find him. But that's just kind of a few little somber notes in what is mostly a celebratory text. So at a minimum, whatever else we make of the song, it's just celebration of togetherness, of presence, of mutual admiration, of beauty, of sensual enjoyment. And so that's pretty important. That exists in the Bible. Non-problem solving, not troubleshooting, not overcoming.
Not a response to a catastrophe.
Not a response to a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how to read that together with the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, is to say that God's personal presence, the glorious presence of God in the tabernacle, also does not answer to any problem or catastrophe, which might sound strange because most of us, especially Protestants, are used to thinking about the tabernacle is for atonement.
It's for sacrifices.
Yes,
fix things.
The sacrifices are to mend the breach between humans and God. And that's why the tabernacle exists. That's mostly what happens inside of it. Boring, legislation around all that, how to access the tabernacle at what time, what sort of rites to do to cleanse oneself, etc. And that's not entirely wrong. There is, of course, the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. There are individual chatat, sin offerings that happen in the first 11 chapters of Leviticus. But the basic daily offering in the tabernacle is non-atoning. It doesn't do anything with respect to sin.
It's just about closeness to God.
It's just making a gift to God.
Hmm.
Yep. And so too, God's presence in the midst there is explicitly, programmatically in Leviticus, so that I may dwell among them, so that I may bless them.
Hmm.
Not to fix anything.
Yeah.
Or one thinks of, this was our text Sunday, a variety of texts in the Old Testament. I mean, Amos, some of the Psalms, where basically the people are like, or Micah 6 was our text the Sunday. And so it was basically God having a trial, and Israel is on, the defendant, and the mountains are the witnesses, and God is saying, you've done bad things. And they're like, wait a minute, we sacrificed rivers of oil. And that's the famous, do justice, love mercy,
Walk humbly
with your God text, And so is that kind of where we're going? Is that, like we tend to think of problem and solution, right? So like we've offended God and we offer sacrifice, or the work of the cross or whatever is problem solution oriented. But the end is that God actually wants to be close with us. And so like he wants us to kind of keep the main thing, or have more of a relationship with us, or not get caught up in semantics and pedantic arguments about living purely. I mean, is that kind of where we end up?
Yeah, I mean, the pedantic arguments oftentimes are oriented towards how to make that closeness possible. But you're right, as far as the kind of keeping the main thing, and I would just say not waiting until the end. You said something about the end, versus understanding that the middle of the Bible, not just the bookends, but the whole thing is really saturated with this concern and interest of God to draw close to humans and to other creatures, that God delights, God blesses. I listed out earlier a lot of the key concepts we tend to reach for when it comes to understanding God's mission: healing, reconciliation, redemption, working justice, walking humbly with God, etc. Most of those, maybe not walking humbly, but most of those are reparative, versus thinking about what God does in the beginning is to bless. That's not repairing. That's just speaking forth flourishing, plenty. But blessing's not just limited to the beginning.
That's right.
God does a lot of blessing, actually, as you go along. And that Gerhard von Rad, this Lutheran guy, German guy, in effect kind of transforms those blessings that are after the fall into detox. It's transforming them into problem solving. But that's actually not what blessing is. Blessing is just its own lane.
Yeah.
So God promises to bless Abraham. God authorizes the sons of Aaron to sort of say the priestly blessing. That's arguably like a central piece in the Pentateuch. At the end of the Pentateuch, end of Leviticus, end of Deuteronomy, God promises blessing. So blessing is like a very important concept. I'd say also in the Gospels, the New Testament. Yes, Jesus heals. He casts out demons. He teaches. He speaks forgiveness. But when people bring those kids to him, he blesses them. And the blessing isn't transferable. It's not interchangeable with those other things. He's not blessing those kids in order to save them or heal them.
It's
or
not
forgive
conditional.
them.
It's communion.
Yeah, it just has its own thing. He wants to bless those kids. He blesses the disciples when he sends in Luke, etc.
I have a question though about going back to the tabernacle. I'm just thinking, how maybe you deal with this in the book. What do you say to someone that says, okay, that all sounds so beautiful and lovely that the main purpose of the tabernacle is to be close with God for one dude, for the priest who can go into the Holy of Holies, but that's not everybody. That's not all the Israelites. It's certainly not the whole world. How do you reconcile that with kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, just that a lot of times in the Bible, there is sort of a representative way that things work.
Yeah.
So
his closeness is our closeness.
Yeah, that the people participate somehow in the closeness of the one individual. I mean, that's basically what we say as Christians, right? That we are united with Jesus in his death and resurrection.
Yes.
Means that sort of our experience, our fate, our benefits are sort of drawing on his, that he's sort of the federal head or whatever that we participate in. And I think so likewise with, David in the Old Testament, or kingship in general in the Old Testament, that how the king sort of, how he fares in relation to God really determines the thriving of the whole people. Similarly, the entire nation of Israel, all the different tribes are arranged, if you remember, if you get to Numbers, the beginning first 10 chapters of Numbers, arranged around the tabernacle.
Is that getting to the
Like-
whole geometric Bible thing?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so they're arranged around the tabernacle, and they participate via their representative. And also, actually, arguably, other creatures, not just humans, kind of have their rep in the tabernacle. That the stitching and the curtains is the cherubim, sort of a kind of hybrid creature.
Chimeric.
Yeah, that the lampstand is plant, looks like a plant. It's there. So that creation as a whole kind of has a presence or has a representative in that space where God meets.
I love that. I love that partly because when we talk about the problem of suffering and evil, the hardest part of that is always the kind of natural disaster thing. Like, but why the earth? Like, I get that humans have made some bad decisions and the ripple effect of that, but mountains and trees didn't do anything and they're dying of disease. Well, mountains aren't dying of disease, but you know what I'm saying? And so I love that imagery that they are represented also in this closeness, intimate space.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. I said in the intro that we were going to talk about this and we're running out of time. So what is the geometric Bible?
Yeah, geometric sounds maybe kind of mathematical or science fiction-y, but I chose that term as an alternative to the single plot Bible,
Okay.
the Bible that's just one big story or one big drama. So a way of framing the Bible as containing multiple plot lines, not just the sin and salvation story or the rupture and repair story, which is mostly kind of foregrounded for many of us theologically, but also the story of creation towards its consummation or its fullness, or even I'd say creation towards Christ. Because a big part of the claim of the book is that Christ's coming, yes, accomplishes salvation, but that is not its exhaustive purpose. And in fact, that God means to draw near to creatures by joining us in
There
the
we
person
go.
of the Son.
That's closing an earlier loop. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
that is God's everlasting purpose. That the coming of Jesus isn't only salvific.
Yeah.
That's kind of needing something more to justify why his presence remains incarnate.
Yes.
Not just that it was, but that it remains. That's what we say as Christians.
Yep.
The risen Lord is still human, is still
Yes.
embodied. Pretty important stuff. But why? Because fellowship, communion, koinonia is God's purpose. Deeper, that sort of plot line, that's another sort of logic or economy or plot line in the Bible, is in fact more basic than the sin and salvation story. So that's at least
And that's where you got the title for it, the book.
Yeah.
God draws near, that nearness.
That's right. So
Very
that's
cool.
at least two lines there. The
Yeah.
sort of creation to Christ line and the sin and salvation line. The claim of the book is that the one sits nested inside of the other. Because the one will come to an end.
Sure.
We trust that
Yes.
that God will bring all things decisively, to a right relationship.
Yeah.
And so then if we don't have something else to say, well, then why is Jesus still incarnate? What's left to pursue? It is that ongoing communion with God, which is ever deepening. We don't as creatures ever graduate from being Christ, made through Christ and for Christ.
I admit I've never thought about until this podcast why he's still embodied.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting.
Okay,
Okay.
I want to ask a crazy question. All right. I don't know how to form it though. But basically it's going to go like this. We live in a very technological age in which even our food is divorced from many natural processes. We talk about this actually a lot on the show. I mean, fertilizers and
Pesticides and
pesticides.
nasty,
And, like the food pyramid and stuff like that. And
food shipped from China that we have
I mean,
sitting for ages.
Yeah. And I really think like we're due for a massive like reform of like literally what we eat, how we grow food, something very primal like that. And I would like to think that Christians could offer a kind of biblical theology that anyone can understand of why what we're doing is actually wrong. I would be very interested in that, for someone to come along and say, actually, the way that we ought to be living is that not just that we grow corn, but that we actually have a relationship with the earth to where it's good for the earth, which
good for
what
us.
we're doing right now is not good for the earth. right?
Yeah.
We're starving it of
Mhm.
nutrients, which
Mhm.
means we're starving ourselves of nutrients and so on. It's affecting our bodies. That's certainly a theory that I happen to agree with. It's not good for us, right? And we're removed from God. We're like playing God. I mean,
Mm.
we can't even put a seed in the ground and watch it grow. Like, it has to be genetically modified. So I'd be curious, and I don't know where to go with this, but I'm just putting it out
Do
as
you have
like,
any thoughts about all of that?
yeah, I don't know, GMOs.
Yeah, maybe not sort of granularly, but I have a book recommendation or an author recommendation. You should definitely check out Norman Wurzba, his
Okay.
work, because he is a theologian, but he's also kind of coming at it from an agrarian perspective, sort of a disciple or protege of Wendell Berry, but not in a kind of back to the land
Okay.
mode. More so trying to think about exactly the themes that you named, how we can practice kind of relationship that's mutual, respectful with ourselves, with earth, with other creatures, but knowing that people live in cities and the world is urbanizing, and you know, kind of it's some of those fertilizers and mass, you know, huge industrial systems that have enabled humans just to like, you know, survive and be able to have the populations that we have now.
Sure.
So he's not kind of turning back the clock, but interesting theologian to check out as far as that goes. The other thing I wanted to say in response to your kind of query there is just that paradoxically, it's being able to have non-transactional or non-instrumental relationships, non-utilitarian relationships with ourselves and also with non-human creatures that is going to actually be better for us, even on those kind of transactional utilitarian terms. Hope that makes sense. So,
do you mean we should have
just
pets? What do you mean?
no, I mean by that if we're sort of only measuring our relationships with other creatures, animals, and lands, and so on, in terms of how they're good for us or how to maximize their value for us as humans, it's kind of a dead end as far as trying to sort of improve those relationships, where if we're locked into that paradigm, versus thinking about that there's something about kind of a non-utilitarian, non-reductive relationship with other creatures that in fact ends up being better for us and for them.
Do you know who Joel Salatin is? He's like
Famous farmer.
got his own TV show. He's a regenerative farmer and all that kind of stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
But yeah, so he like, you know, he grows or raises animals and kills them and sells them. And the long and short of it is that he loves the animals.
Yes.
He kills the animals, but he treats the animals so much better
Yeah.
than the FDA demands we treat them. And
Right.
he gets in trouble for treating his animals better than the bare minimum of the FDA in terms of the slaughterhouses, how they're killed, how they're raised, how they're force-fed, hormones, all this kind of stuff. He's like, I let them eat grass and walk around in and of course land that was fed by, you know, by manure, and then the
Good bugs.
then the
Yeah.
chickens came and you know scratched at it and made the bugs come up, and so the ground was you know refertilized and all that, all very natural and quote unquote organic. But he can't use the label organic.
Yeah.
For example, he is disallowed from using the word organic because of how the government has constrained it. And so this is kind of my point, which is that like I actually want our government to be like driven, and this is where I'm like a crazy person or whatever, a theonomist or whatever you want to call me, but like I want our government to actually be driven by the biblical story and by biblical law. And part of that, I think, would get us to a point where the farmers farm like Joel Salatin does, where he doesn't only view the relationship to the chickens and the pigs and the cows as transactional. I think he actually loves them. He
And is
kills them.
grateful, yes.
He kills them, but it's delicious food that where everyone kind of been. I mean, so I don't think there's any real problem with like raising an animal to kill it, to eat it. But like there are definitely better and worse ways to do that, you know? And like, I would love to see Christians be more explicit about that. And he's a good example of, I think, someone who does. But this other say that name of the theologian one more
Yeah,
time?
Norman Wurzba. I think you
Okay.
really like his books because,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, even just I just completed a review of his most recent book called Love's Braided Dance. It's really kind of like a series of meditations. More, I wouldn't say quite devotional, but kind of more trending that way than like an academic, you know, book. But he talks about the example of his grandfather in, I think, Alberta, Canada, but who would do all kinds of things for the animals, like cutting grass, you know, to give to the chickens. It's not necessary, but it's just out of, you know, wanting them to enjoy their lives. And like you say, that ends up sort of being so much healthier for the humans. We benefit from that kind of just care, enjoyment. And again, I think that those sorts of terms and concerns, enjoyment, delight, care, mutuality, not typically foregrounded when it comes to mission discourse, but in fact end up being like I said, sort of paradoxically really important for us in our relationship with God, for how we relate to other people in non-transactional ways, and even extending that further to the sort of non-human world.
Okay, so we are for sure out of time, but I want to not necessarily tie it up with a bow, because I want people to be curious enough to read the book. You should go get it. It's called God Draws Near, Rethinking the Biblical Theology of Mission. But let me just ask you this. If the sort of pièce de résistance of the Old Testament is this tabernacle intimacy, communion with God, and that's maybe how we ought to think about mission, then give it to us in really practical. I'm trying to be like a Baptist sermon here. What's the takeaway? Like, as I think about my life and its purpose, that yes, I should be telling people, I should be sharing the gospel. You're not saying no to that, but but what can I be doing or thinking about or meditating on to have a more complete sort of view of mission in my life?
Yeah. So a whole chapter in the book addresses the incarnation and what I call Christocosmogonic texts. So basically Christ creator texts in the New Testament. There's a handful of them, famously John 1, maybe less famously Colossians 1. There's some other ones. But part of the basic claim of those New Testament texts is not just that Jesus came to seek and save the lost, or to gather the kind of scattered tribes of Israel or what have you, but rather that all things are made through him. And even Colossians 1, I think verse 16 says that they're made toward him or for him. And so for ourselves to understand that we are made toward Jesus, that is to say fellowship, communion, relationship with him, and that is also true of all creatures, evidently. That's what Colossians 1:16 says.
Well, not spiders, but yeah.
All creatures, I mean, whatever, it might mean exactly for individual creatures, but that we're all made towards him. And so how that sort of faces us into other kind of relationships, like you say, Baptist sermon, isn't only trying to locate the sin in other people's lives that currently kind of obstructs their relationship with God, but also trying to listen for the ways that God is at work in their lives, already calling them into that purpose of communion with Christ.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, typically Christian evangelism has begun with trying to
Here's the bad news.
cause problems for people. And that's a real difficulty in a secularizing society or a secularized society, because people don't feel a need for God.
Right.
There's no hole in their heart that only God can fill. They're doing fine.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's sort of the final word for a lot of Christian mission. We don't know what to do. We got to sort of either create a problem, sort of shake them loose from their sense of security.
Them or something.
Yeah, right. Versus thinking, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his prison letters said, you don't need to do that. We don't need to sort of try to make problems in people's lives in order as sort of the prelude to relate them to Jesus, but rather trying to envision that God is already deeply central to the whole human community, that God has made all things through Christ, for Christ. And so in as much as people experience not just problems, guilt, sin, hardship, failure, suffering, but also as they experience generosity, connection, togetherness, joy, that too you can sort of lean into in terms as a witness to them, to say there's more generosity, there's more joy than you've yet experienced. That's a more sort of kind of attractive and non-obsolescing way of posing witness.
Oh, I love that. I love that too, because it also not only just missionally, but just in marriages, in relationships with colleagues, we all have this moment where you have to kind of internally say, like, okay, this person is made in God's image. I'm not going to be so angry at him right now or whatever. But it's not just that. It's this idea that if I can be in communion with this person, I'm actually closer to the Lord, because we were both made, as you say, toward Christ.
Yeah.
Man, really beautiful. Okay. I love this. I'm for sure going to read this. If people want to interact with you more, maybe you don't want them to, but if people want to find you, where can they find you?
No, I welcome interaction. I mean, probably the easiest thing is just to Google my name, and then my faculty profile will come up. The email address is right on there, Collin Cornell at Fuller.edu.
2 L's.
Yeah, 2 L's. The unabridged version of Collin, 2 L's. So yeah, I'm happy to answer emails. That's probably the best way. I'm not super much on social media, but I do answer emails, and
Yeah.
happy to keep the conversation running.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Again, go to theologybythepint.org to find out about all of our upcoming events and come out and join us. And you might see Collin at one. We might get him back on the panel sometime soon. But until we see you again, we encourage you, as always, to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.